Here we will examine the functional anatomy of the digestive system, and we'll begin with the structures of the mouth. So digestion begins in the mouth, where food is chewed and mixed with saliva. The organs and structures that are associated with the mouth are the tongue, the teeth, and the salivary glands. The mouth is the space that is located between the lips, the cheeks, the palate, and the tongue. The epithelium that lines the mouth is a stratified squamous epithelium. So we see that this is an appropriate epithelium for the mouth because it's a tough epithelium that helps to resist abrasion. The oral orifice is an anterior opening to the mouth, which is bordered by the lips, also called the red margin. While the oral vestibule are small pockets of space that are situated between the cheeks, the teeth, and the gums. The palate forms the roof of the mouth. We see that the hard palate is the bony structure that is formed by the maxilla and palatine bones. The soft palate is composed of skeletal muscle and functions to close the nasopharynx when we are swallowing. The uvula also assists in closing the nasopharynx during swallowing. The palatine tonsils are located between the palatoglossal arch and the palatopharyngeal arch. The palatoglossal arches anchor the soft palate to the tongue, as their name implies. Glossal refers to the tongue, and the palatopharyngeal arches anchor the soft palate to the oropharynx. The tongue itself occupies the floor of the mouth and is composed of skeletal muscle. The tongue functions to grip and mix the food that we are chewing. It also forms the bolus, which is the food and saliva mixture, and it initiates swallowing, speech, as well as taste because it has taste receptors on its surface. The superior surface of the tongue contains small little peg-like projections of the mucosa that are referred to as papillae. The different types of papillae have different locations on the tongue as well as different functions. We see that the filiform papillae do not contain taste buds and are scattered across the majority of the tongue's surface. They are rough, small, and provide friction for moving and mixing food. The fungiform papillae, on the other hand, are mushroom-shaped, as their name implies, and they are less abundant than the filiform papillae, but still scattered over the majority of the tongue's surface. The valate papillae are located on the posterior of the tongue and are found in a V-shaped row. And finally, the foliate papillae are located on the posterior and the lateral aspects of the tongue and tend to be leaf-shaped, so as the term foliate refers to leaf-like. We see that taste buds are found in the fungiform, the valate, and the foliate papillae. So the filiform and fungiform papillae are scattered over the majority of the surface of the tongue, particularly the anterior and lateral parts of the tongue. The fungiform papillae tend to be much larger than the filiform papillae and are much less numerous than the filiform papillae. The valate papillae form a V-shaped row at the posterior aspect of the tongue, while we see that the foliate papillae are leaf-like folds at the posterior and lateral aspects of the tongue. The salivary glands function to produce a mixture of both saliva and mucus. Saliva functions to cleanse the mouth. It also helps dissolve food chemicals for taste. It helps to compact the mass of food and saliva into a bolus. Remember, the bolus was the term we used for that small mass of food and saliva. We also see that saliva functions to begin the breakdown of starch using an enzyme called amylase. The major salivary glands are extrinsic to the oral cavity and are located outside of the mouth. That is, they're still located within the head and the skull. We just don't see that they're located within the oral cavity itself. Minor salivary glands, on the other hand, are located within the oral cavity, and they function to keep the mouth moistened at all times. The major salivary glands are the parotid gland, the sublingual gland, and the submandibular gland. The parotid gland is located anterior to the ear. The sublingual gland is located inferior to the tongue, so as the term lingual refers to the tongue. So the name of this gland is roughly translated to beneath the tongue. And finally, we see that the submandibular gland is located medial and inferior to the mandible bone. So what are the major components of saliva? So saliva is mostly water, and we see that it's similar in composition to blood composition in that it has some electrolytes like sodium, potassium, and bicarbonate, which is HCO3-. We see that saliva also contains enzymes like amylase, which aids in the digestion of starches, and lingual lipase, which lipases aid in the digestion of lipids. We also see that it contains mucin, which is a protein that becomes mucus when mucin is mixed with water. So saliva, like most of the digestive system secretions, requires large amounts of water. We see that up to 1,500 milliliters per day of saliva can be produced. So keep in mind that most of the water that is used by the digestive system, including that produced by the salivary glands, will be reabsorbed by the small intestine. The major salivary glands are activated by the parasympathetic, that is the rest and digest division of the autonomic nervous system. We see that activation occurs when ingested food stimulates chemoreceptors and mechanoreceptors in the mouth. We also see that long reflexes that are associated with the central nervous system can trigger salivation based off of the smell and the sight of food, which can also stimulate salivary gland activation. We see that strong activation of the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system will inhibit salivary glands. So recall that this is the fight or flight division, and strong activation of the sympathetic division can cause dry mouth. The teeth within the mouth function in mastication, so that is, chewing the food into smaller pieces and mechanically breaking it up. We see that the teeth lie in sockets within the maxilla and the mandible, so that is the upper jaw and the lower jaw. Between the ages of 6 and 24 months, we see that the deciduous or the milk teeth will emerge. There are 20 deciduous teeth, and this is our first set of teeth. The permanent teeth will begin emerging between 6 and 12 years of age, with the last of the permanent teeth, that is the third molars, which are also referred to as the wisdom teeth, will emerge between 17 and 25 years of age. We have 32 permanent teeth, and this is our second set of teeth. So we have two sets of teeth because historically humans have consumed food that has been contaminated with either dirt or sand, which tends to cause wear on our teeth, and that wears down our first set of teeth, that is our deciduous teeth, over time. So a second set of teeth ensures that our teeth will still continue to function properly even later in life. So the teeth have different shapes, and each shape has a specific function. We see that incisors are chisel-shaped teeth that are specific for cutting and slicing food. Canines, on the other hand, are fang-like teeth that pierce and tear food. Premolars, which are also called bicuspids, and molars tend to have broad crowns with small, sharp points that crush and grind food. The dental formula gives us the number of teeth on each side of the upper or lower jaw. So for instance, if we examine the right side of the upper jaw, we see that there are two incisors, a central incisor and a lateral incisor, one canine, and two molars. We see the same on the left side. So the same formula applies to the right side of the lower jaw. We have two incisors, one canine, and two molars. So multiplying these numbers by 2 gives us 20 deciduous or milk teeth. The dental formula changes slightly for the permanent teeth. We see that there are two incisors, a central incisor and a lateral incisor, one canine, two premolars, and three molars. So the right side of the upper jaw has 8 teeth, and the right side of the lower jaw also has 8 teeth. Multiply that by 2 to account for the left sides of the jaw would yield 32 permanent teeth. Now let's examine tooth structure. Each tooth has 3 regions: the crown, the neck, and the root. The crown is the exposed part of the tooth above the gum or the gingiva. The neck connects the crown to the root of the tooth. And finally, the root is the portion of the tooth that's embedded within the jawbone. So what structures compose the parts of the tooth crown, the tooth neck, and the tooth root? The enamel is the ceramic-like material that covers the superficial surface of the tooth crown. Enamel is the hardest biologically made substance and helps to resist the compressive forces that are placed on the tooth when biting and chewing. The bulk of the tooth is composed of a bone-like material called dentin. Although it is similar to in composition to bone, it is technically not bone, which is why we don't count the teeth as part of the skeleton. So just like bone does, Dentin helps to act as a shock absorber. So just like bone is a shock absorber for our skeleton, dentin acts as a shock absorber for our teeth. So in that way, bone and dentin are functionally very similar to one another, even though they are not classified as similar to one another in terms of material. At the center of the crown and the neck is a small cavity that's called the pulp cavity, which contains the pulp of the tooth. The pulp is a mass of nerves, blood vessels, and connective tissues. The nerves act as sensory structure, such as heat, cold, and pressure for the tooth, while the blood vessels nourish the dentin material. The cement or the cementum is a calcified connective tissue that covers the root of the tooth, and it provides a surface to which the periodontal ligaments can attach to. We see that the periodontal ligaments are the small ligaments that anchor the teeth to the walls of the tooth socket. And finally, in the root, we see the root canal, which is a small extension of the pulp cavity. So it's essentially a hollow chamber that goes between the pulp cavity and the inner parts of the jawbone, and it allows for the passage of nerves and blood vessels from the jawbone into the pulp cavity.